Good morning to everyone. Today we will be starting with a new topic. Most frequently, long question will be focused on immunoglobulins, its structure and functions. Please do concentrate on this topic. It's very important. So let us know what are these immunoglobulins. When foreign substances, for example, the antigens, they are introduced into our body, they trigger the appearance of antibodies. Those are nothing but immunoglobulins in the serum and any other body fluids, that we call them as immunoglobulins, and they are represented as Ig, that is I, small g, and S, that is immunoglobulins. Look at an example here. A rabbit. We are going to inject an antigen into the rabbit. The antigen is going to activate the B cells of the rabbit. The B cells are going to undergo proliferation. The plasma B cells, they are going to produce enormous amount of polyclonal antibodies. Plasma B cells produce polyclonal antibodies, and these secreted antibodies obtain antiserum from the rabbit. Obtain antiserum from rabbit containing this polyclonal. By injecting back, we can obtain the secreted antibodies from the rabbit. And immune response. What is immune response? Immune response of the body mainly consists of B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. You are very well aware of this particular aspect. The B lymphocytes are mainly derived from the bone marrow in the higher animals and bursa fabricus in birds, and they are responsible for the synthesis of humoral antibodies known as immunoglobulins, which means they play an important role in humoral immunity. In contrast with the T lymphocytes, they are of thymic origin, means they are produced from the thymic gland. They are involved in cell-mediated immunity. They play an important role in cell-mediated immunity. Now, what is the definition of immunoglobulins? The immunoglobulins, they constitute a heterogeneous family of serum proteins. They are all proteins again. Proteins which either function as antibodies or chemically related antibodies. So they are the heterogeneous family of serum proteins which either they function as antibodies or chemically related antibodies. Where do we find them when we run a serum electrophoresis? Already we are aware of protein electrophoresis, and these immunoglobulins are going to be separated in the gamma fraction. When we do serum protein electrophoresis, we get 5 different bands. One is albumin, alpha 1, alpha 2, beta and gamma. The immunoglobulins are going to be present in they occupy the gamma region. And coming to the structure of immunoglobulin, it is a long essay question. The scientists Edelman and Galli, they were the scientists who has described the immunoglobulin structure. Hence the structure of immunoglobulin, we call it as Edelman-Galli model. In 1962, Porter and Gerald independently they proposed the structure of immunoglobulins, for which they were awarded Nobel Prize. The 3 concepts about immunoglobulin structure that one has to learn is: number 1, about heavy chains and light chains, variable and constant regions, FAB and FC portions. FAB stands for fraction antibody and fraction crystallizable, that is FC portions. Coming to the structure of the immunoglobulin, in general all the immunoglobulins are made up of heavy chains and light chains. When you look at the structure of this particular immunoglobulin, which is containing 2 heavy chains, this is heavy chain, this complete Y, we call it as heavy chain. There are 2 in number, 1 and 2, and 2 light chains. You can see here blue and violet, this is light chain, and 2 heavy chains. The heavy chain and light chain, they are linked with each other with the help of disulfide bridges. You can see the disulfide bonds present over here, and in the heavy chains they are linked with the help of again disulfide bonds. Getting my point? They consist of immunoglobulins are made up of 2 heavy chains and 2 light chain, but number of heavy chains and number of light chains is going to vary according to the type of immunoglobulin that we study. They consist of what is called as, they consist of carboxyl terminal and amino terminal. You can see amino terminal and this is the carboxy terminal. Again they are proteins. So COOH group, that is carboxyl end, this is amino end. Now, so this is about the heavy chain and light chain. So they are made up of, because of the molecular weight, the heavy chain molecular weight is more compared to the light chain. They are called as heavy chains and light chain depending upon the molecular weight of the chains. Now there is something called constant region and variable region, which is represented as C and V. C stands for constant region and V stands for variable region. Now H represents heavy chain, that means they are present on the heavy chain. L represent they are present on the light chain. Now the heavy chain and light chain, they are containing variable region and constant region. So this is a heavy chain which is made up of CH1, CH2 and CH3. That is constant region on heavy chain 1, constant region on heavy chain 2 and constant region on heavy chain 3. Getting my point? And this is variable region. Why are they called as constant and variable regions? Constant region, that means the amino acid composition in this region remains to be constant. Getting my point? The amino acid composition in the constant region remains to be constant, whereas the amino acid composition in the variable region varies depending upon the type of immunoglobulin. Hence we call it as constant and heavy regions. We can see here similarly on the light chain we have VL and CL, that is constant light chain, and the variable region on the light chain. Getting my point? So this is about the variable and constant regions. And there is something called hinge region. You can see here this is called as hinge region. This plays an important role in this hinge region is prone to be attacked by certain enzymes which we are going to discuss later. Okay, so this is called FAB region and this is FC region. FAB stands for fraction antibody binding. It has got antibody binding sites. You can see here the antigen binding sites are located on the terminals of the heavy chain, on the terminal section, that is in the variable region of the heavy chains. That is antibody binding site, and this is FC region. That is nothing but fraction crystallizable region. Getting my point? And also FC stands for fraction crystallizable, and this is meant for complement binding. This entire portion is meant for complement binding and this portion is meant for antigen binding. Okay, so this is about in brief about the structure of immunoglobulin. There is something called FAB and FC fractions we will discuss now. Yeah, depending upon the type of heavy chain, the immunoglobulins are being classified into 5 different varieties. Let us look at them. IgG, it contains gamma heavy chain. IgA variety contains alpha chain. IgM variety contains mu chain. IgD contains delta chain and IgE contains epsilon. The light chains are either kappa or lambda. So I told you they are made up of heavy chains. Depending upon the type of heavy chain, they are classified into 5 different types: IgG, IgA, IgM, IgD, IgE. And the light chains are of 2 categories, that is kappa and lambda. Now look at the cleavages by different proteases. When this is a hinge region of the immunoglobulin, this violet colored arrow, you can see here the violet colored arrow. When papain is an enzyme which is present in fruit called papaya. This papain enzyme, it is going to cleave the hinge region of the immunoglobulin. When it cleaves at this particular fraction, we get 2 different fractions of FAB. Getting my point? 2 FAB plus FC, this portion, FC portion. Okay, this is how the papain cleaves. Papain attacks at the hinge region of the immunoglobulin, separating them into FAB and FC fractions. There is another enzyme called pepsin, which is again a proteolytic enzyme. It attacks, you can see here the orange color arrow, it attacks the immunoglobulin at this region, means below the hinge region. So what happens? It gives FAB2. There is no FC fraction over here because FC fraction is already attached to this FAB fraction. Getting my point? So thus leaving FAB2 fractions. This is about the cleavages of the immunoglobulin by particular proteases. So this is very important. Papain cleaves at the hinge region producing FAB and FC fractions. Now coming to the types of immunoglobulins. Any particular type can be asked in the examination. This is IgG, IgM, IgA, IgD and IgE. Now the structure of IgG, that is, it is a monomer because it is containing 2 light chains and 2 heavy chains. It is a single antibody. Coming to the IgM, it is a pentamer. You can see now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 IgG molecules are attached here. Okay, resulting in what is called as pentamer. Thus, can you tell me how many heavy chains and how many light chains are present in IgM? It is 10 heavy chains and 10 light chains. Now coming to the IgA variety, it is a dimer. Means it is made up of 2 different fractions. That is 2 different subunits. You can see here one subunit, this is another subunit. Okay, they are attached with each other with the help of a J component. This is called J component, which helps in the attachment of these 2 monomers. Now there is something called secretory component in IgA. This is very, very important. We will discuss later. And now tell me how many heavy chains and how many light chains are present? Totally 4 heavy chains and 4 light chains. Coming to IgD, it is similar to IgG, and IgE as well similar to the IgG. Only exceptions are IgM and IgA, which has got IgA is a dimer and IgM is a pentamer. IgG, IgD and E, all these 3 are monomers. Now coming to the type of heavy chain present in IgG as gamma chain. In case of IgM, mu chain is present. In case of IgA, alpha chain is present, and in case of IgD, it is delta chain, and IgE contains epsilon. So the number of antigen binding sites will be 2 here, and here it will be 10, and here it will be 4, depending upon the number of light chains and heavy chains. IgD, it has got 2 and IgE got 2. Molecular weight, when you look at the molecular weight of the immunoglobulins, the highest molecular weight is for IgM. It is a heavy molecule. It is about 9 lakhs daltons. Whereas the next bigger or the next molecular weight containing immunoglobulin will be IgA, which is about 3,85,000, and followed by the IgE, followed by IgD, followed by IgG. When you represent the total antibody concentration in the serum, the maximum amount of immunoglobulin that is present will be IgG variety, which is accounting for 80%, and followed by IgA 13%, followed by IgM 6%, followed by IgD and IgE. Both of them are present at a concentration of less than 1%. Now coming to the structure, which is already explained, and this is a very, very important feature of immunoglobulins, that is the crossing of placenta from mother to the baby. IgM, IgA, IgD, IgE does not cross placenta, thus they are free from these antibodies from the mother. But IgG variety, remember, it's going to cross placenta. It's a very, very important aspect because it is related something to the RH incompatibility, fetal hemolysis. When it comes to the complement function, fixing of the complement is more common with IgG and IgM, but whereas IgA, D and E has nothing to do with the complement. The Fc portion binding to phagocytes is well executed by this IgG variety, but and also IgE, which is going to bind to the mast cells and the basophils. But IgM, A and D lacks this property. Coming to the IgG, individually we are going to discuss the functions. It plays an important role in opsonization, neutralization, cell-dependent, cell-mediated cytotoxicity, and similar to IgM. And IgA plays an important role in neutralization, trapping of the pathogens in the mucus, and IgD acts as a beta cell receptor, and IgE, as you all know, that it's a great mediator of anaphylaxis, allergic reactions, especially against the parasites. Coming to the individual function and the significance, coming to the immunoglobulin G, yes, it is a main antibody which is going to be present in the secondary immune response. It crosses placenta, that we already know, and it protects the newborn against the infection. The advantage of this IgA being present, having a function of crossing the placenta, is that it's going to offer immunity to the baby, the growing fetus. Thus the fetus is free from the acquiring of the new infections. It helps in the opsonization of bacteria. That means to the complement binding activity, it is going to attack the bacteria. It causes the cell lysis of the bacteria. Then it helps in the complement fixation and it's going to neutralize bacterial toxins as well as viruses. Now coming to the clinical significance of IgG, RH isoimmunization is due to placental crossing of the IgG. This particular concept happens. Suppose, look at a pregnant lady who is she is a RH negative mother, whereas the baby is RH positive. The fetus is RH positive and the mother is RH negative. What happens immediately after the delivery? Some of the antibodies are going to be, because there is a mixing of the fetal blood with the maternal blood during delivery or soon after the delivery, the RH antibodies are produced in the maternal blood. But still the baby is safe because it requires adequate time for the antibodies again to cross react with the baby and cause fetal hemolysis. The first pregnancy is going to be safer. The RH negative mother having RH positive baby, during the delivery these antigens are going to enter into the maternal circulation and they produce sufficient antibodies, but they are not going to harm the baby in the first pregnancy. Yes, what happens in the next subsequent pregnancy? Already this RH antibodies are present in the sufficient quantity in the mother's blood, the maternal blood. In the subsequent pregnancy, when she conceives again, if she gets a RH positive baby or the fetus, the antibodies which are already produced during her first pregnancy are going to cross the placenta and they are going to cause fetal hemolysis, antigen antibody, and they are going to cause destruction of the fetal red blood cell, as the fetus suffers from the hemolytic disease of the newborn. This is called as RH incompatibility. Now coming to the clinical significance of IgM. IgM antibodies are, first of all, they are natural, and the person with the blood group A will have anti-B antibodies in the circulation. The main role of this IgM, it cannot cross the placenta so that the fetus will not be affected even though it carries incompatible antigen. Unlike that we get it in case of IgG, the IgM does not cause much problem because it has nothing to do with the crossing the placenta. So the baby is safe here if it carries incompatible antigen. Now, it does not cross placenta and it fixes complement. Yeah. Next is IgA variety. This IgA, I told you, it is a dimer having a J chain connecting between the two monomers. Getting my point? And it has got something called secretory component. There are two types of IgA depending upon their location. One that is present in the serum, one that is present in the body secretion. Since it is called secretory IgA, the one which is present in the serum, we call it a serum IgA. The serum IgA can be monomer or can be dimer, whereas secretory IgA, it is in the dimer. The T protein is absent in case of serum IgA and secretory IgA contains T protein. Getting my point? And what are the functions of IgA? Definitely it doesn't cross placenta. It provides primary defense mechanism against some local infections, and it do exhibits antibacterial activity. It does not fix complement, has nothing to do with the complement. The T piece containing the T protein, it is involved in selective transport and it protects the IgA molecule from the digestion by the proteolytic enzyme. This is the main advantage of presence of this T piece in the secretory and serum IgA. It is going to protect the IgA molecule from the digestion by the proteolytic enzymes. Now coming to the IgD variety, it is the function is again uncertain, but it is found on many B cells as well as in the serum. Mainly it is playing an important role in the differentiation of B cells, and IgD with antibody activity found towards certain allergens, like patients having allergy to certain milk proteins and insulin and penicillin kind of allergy. So these are the antibodies playing significant role in them. The functions and clinical significance of IgE, again we are very sure about that IgE mediates hypersensitivity reaction, does not go to cross placenta, does not fix the complement, it defends against worm infestations, and it has got a defense against the helminthic infections. Now So suppose if I tell you a case history, a pregnant lady who had come for the general checkup at her 24 age, and as a routine investigation, the syphilis test was done for her, and the syphilis becomes positive, and treating doctor puts her on weekly thrice injection of penicillin, that is benzathine penicillin. The first dose was given, and immediately the lady returns to home back, and suddenly she complains of urticaria, complains of angioedema. She finds highly difficulty in breathing, and suddenly she collapses. She was forced to shift into the emergency department. What is will be the most important cause of this particular sort of reaction in this patient? Because after giving penicillin injection, what happens is that the patients who are highly exhibiting allergic phenomenon, there is a shoot up of IgE immunoglobulins, thus there is a unlimited release of histamine and histamine-like compounds in the body, which is going to mediate the severe allergic reaction, and the patient is going to collapse. So this is the important history about penicillin anaphylaxis one has to keep in their mind. That's why the test dose has to be given before you are going to take a decision of giving penicillin injection to the particular persons who have got a severe allergic history. Now there's something called class switching. Let us see what is this class switching. Isotypes. First of all, to understand this class switching, one need to understand what are isotypes and what are allotypes. Isotypes are nothing but variants in the molecules seen in the normal persons, like subclasses of IgG, IgM, IgA, this kind of thing. These are called as isotypes. Allotypes. There is a variation in the subclass itself. It depends upon the allelic forms. Suppose the patient has got IgG molecules, the GM groups. Some of them may be GM positive, some of them may be GM negative. What does it mean? GM positive means each of is immunoglobulin G1 molecule has got an amino acid sequence of aspartic acid, glutamic acid followed by threonine. This sequence, if it is present, we call it that he is GM positive. GM negative means the sequence which is present is methionine followed by glutamic acid and threonine. If this sequence is present, we say that it is GM negative. Now, class switching definitely occurs during the immune process. In most of the humoral immune responses, antibodies with identical specificity but of different classes are generated in a specific chronological order in response to immunity. Whenever there is an antigen exposure to the human being, okay, so the certain types of antibodies are generated, like they may belong to IgM, IgJ, IgD, IgE. Getting my point? For an instance, antibodies of IgM class normally precedes the antibodies of IgG class. This switching of one class of immunoglobulins to another class, we call it as class switching. That's all. These three types of immunoglobulin molecules against the same antigen have got identical variable domains of their light and heavy chains, and they are said to have share a common idiotype. Means they are fixed in their constant and variable regions on the heavy and light chains. This is called as idiotypes. Now coming to sometimes this complement system can be asked for a short answer or short note. Just very few points about this complement system. It is known as complement cascade because it is a chain of reaction like a water flowing, okay, and it consists of a complement factors or the proteins. They are nothing but the proteins that are present in the serum. The abbreviation is C. Totally there are about 9 complement components from C1 to C9. There are 9 complement factors in the complement system. They are concerned with the complement activation. Now look at this pathway. Not bothered about alternative pathway, but be concentrated on classical pathway. Whenever there is an antigen fixing on the antigen, antibody fixing on antigen on the cell, suppose there is a bacteria attack on the R cells, okay, the bacteria attacks on the human cells. Suppose there is a antibody produced by the human cells, it's going to react with the antigen in response to the antigen from the bacteria. There's an antigen and antibody reaction over here. This particular will activate something called complementary factors. I told you C1 to C9 are C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7, C8. This complementary C1 has got 3 different components: C1Q, C1R, C1S. Getting my point? C1Q, that is C1 Q, C1R, C1S, QRS. Among this, Q and R helps in binding of the antibody to them. The S portion of the C1 has got something called esterase activity. The S subunit of C1 has got something called as esterase activity. What does this esterase do? That is called a C1 esterase. It is a proteolytic enzyme. Once we say proteolytic enzyme, the inactive form of the protein will be converted to the active form. For example, I told you pre-proinsulin. When insulin is synthesized, it is first, formed in the pre-proinsulin. Then pre-proinsulin is converted to proinsulin. Then proinsulin to insulin. They are the inactive forms of the protein. Similarly, here what happened? The C1 esterase enzyme is going to activate the inactive components of the complementary factors. Getting my point? They are going to activate the inactive complement factors. First is going to activate C4, resulting in C4A and 4B fraction. This C4B acts on C2 and gets activated, and it's going to combine with C3. In fact, C3A is going to activate C5. This sort of cascade reaction that's going to happen, and ultimately there's a formation of C5, 6, 7 and C8, 9. What are they going to do? They are going to cause pores on the cell, which is to be attacked. When they cause the pores, there is an imbibition of water. There is an entry of water into the cell. So cell will automatically burst. This is called as, the cell membrane will automatically burst. This is called as membrane lysis. Membrane lysis. Suppose I told you that C1 has got QRS subcomponents. What is the function of Q and R? Binding to the antibody. Getting my point? S has got esterase. Esterase also contains S. It is S component. Suppose if this enzyme is present, everything goes well. If this enzyme is not inhibited normally in the body, if it is not inhibited, what can happen? There will be continuous activation of the complement system. Do we require this to happen? No. It might destroy the normal cell as well. So the God has given this something called C1 esterase inhibitor, which is already present. Once the bacterial cell is attacked, once the job is done, now it has to shut down its pathway with the help of an enzyme called inhibitor, which is going to inhibit the esterase enzyme. Now, there is some clinical condition called hereditary angioneurotic edema. These patients are autosomal dominant disorder wherein they are going to lack an enzyme called esterase inhibitor. They do not have C1 esterase inhibitor in them. That case, what is going to happen? There is a cascade activation, continuous, there is a complement cascade functioning in its very high rate. There is a lot of kinins that are going to be generated, resulting in what is called hereditary angioneurotic edema. So this is again a very, very dangerous condition, because the patient can have laryngeal edema of the larynx, and patient can have respiratory arrest. So this is very, very important complication of due to lack of C1 esterase inhibitor. When you examine the serum of this patient, C1 level, the complement 1 levels are going to be normal, but definitely the inhibitor is going to be decreased. So this is about some of the important aspect about the complement system. Now there is some concept called polyclonal and monoclonal antibodies. Poly means many, mono means single. If, for example, look at the structure of this antigen. This is an antigen having got many epitopes. You can see the triangle ones, the green color triangle and red color squares. These are different epitopes that are present on the antigen. If the antibodies are produced against different epitopes of the antigen, they are irrespective of any epitope they are going and binding. They are called as polyclonal. If they are binding only to the particular epitope of an antigen, you can see here the triangle shaped pink color one, only the pink antibodies are going to bind there to this particular triangle shaped epitope. There is something called blue color, blue square epitope. The blue color antibodies are binding here. Means that particular epitope only they are going to bind. They are called as monoclone. Means single clone, here it is many clones. So here it can be the single clone can be only IgM variety, or it can be only IgG variety. But here it is IgM, IgE, IgD, every varieties are present here. They are called as polyclonal. clonal. Means they are present against the different epitopes. Here about the single epitope. Epitopes are nothing but the antibody binding sites which are present on the antigen. And coming to the clinical aspects of this particular chapter, hypogammaglobulinemia. What do you mean by hypogammaglobulinemia? Already the name is indicating that there is a decreased or absence of immunoglobulins. Okay. It can be congenital or it can be acquired secondary to other diseases. The congenital one is called Bruton's disease, that is X-linked disease, wherein the patient lacks production of immunoglobulins. Once the patient lacks production of immunoglobulin, there is no one to protect against the bacterial infection. The patient is more prone for attack of the recurrent bacterial infections. And the secondary causes include multiple myeloma, leukemia and nephrotic syndrome due to loss of so many proteins are lost in nephrotic syndrome, which are again antibodies. Okay, because they are responsible for the prediction of antibody. And in case of multiple myeloma, only one particular clone of immunoglobulins are high. Suppose a patient is having multiple myeloma suffering from IgG clone. That patient will have only IgG. But he is not going to have IgM, IgA, IgD and IgE. Then who is going to protect against helminthic infections? Who is going to do the job of protecting one from the parasitic infections? So in that case, the patient is definitely having hypogammaglobulinemia, but with the relative excess of particular type of immunoglobulin. It can be IgA, it can be, if the patient is having excessive IgA, but he can have deficiency of other immunoglobulins. Okay. So that is about the multiple myeloma. Leukemia, patient have got hypogammaglobulinemia and nephrotic syndrome. And SCID, it stands for severe combined immunodeficiency disease, wherein patient has got a lack of T cells and B cells, humoral immunity and cell-mediated immunity, both are defective. And the main reason for SCID is deficiency of adenosine deaminase, which is richly present in lymphocytes. This is the only disease for which the successful gene therapy was administered. Now coming to the hyperimmunoglobulinemia, that is polyclonal, means it can involve IgG, IgA, IgM, etc. The polyclonal increase in the serum immunoglobulins are normal response. Normally whenever we acquire any infections, there may be shoot up of certain immunoglobulins in our body. Suppose if there is a shoot up of IgG, which is very classical presentation on serum electrophoresis, when we do the isoimmunoglobulin staining, we can even differentiate between the different, but all the immunoglobulins, they will be having present in the gamma region. It is difficult to definitely say that yes, it is IgA variety, or I just looking at the serum electrophoresis slide. One cannot say whether it is belonging to IgG variety, IgM variety. It is not possible, but it is subjected to different analysis, wherein we can pick up IgG variety itself. This IgG fraction is going to be elevated in autoimmune responses, chronic active hepatitis. Somebody suffering from chronic hepatitis A, hepatitis B, C kind of infections can have raised immunoglobulin G concentration. Similarly, for IgA variety is going to be raised in gut infections, skin, respiratory and renal infections. IgM variety, very very important diagnostic feature in case of primary biliary cirrhosis, that stands for PBC, intrauterine infections. I told you it is a antibody of primary immune response. So the primary viral infection can have shoot up of IgM variety. Then in case of chronic bacterial infections, all the varieties are going to be raised. It's difficult to differentiate which variety is more, because all of them are going to be affected. So diagnosis is based on the symptoms of the patient presenting with different infections and estimation of individual immunoglobulins level. Now there is another phenomenon called, another clinical important significance is paraproteinemias. One of the most commonly studied disorder is multiple myeloma. It is also called as plasmacytoma. It is nothing but a malignant tumor of plasma cells. Please concentrate on each and every word. It's a malignant tumor of the plasma cells. It's going to be raising from the bone marrow, characterized by paraproteinemia. Number one, the triad of multiple myeloma is number one, paraproteinemia, number two, lytic bone lesions, Number 3, patient will have severe proteinuria. Getting my point? Paraproteinemia, lytic bone lesions, and number 3, proteinuria. Patient will present with fever, bone pains, lytic bone lesions, proteinuria, anemia, infections, hypercalcemia. There is an increase in the serum calcium level because of the lysis of the bone, and the patient will have renal failure as well. Look at the picture that is showing the lytic bone lesion. They are appearing as punched out lesions. You can see the punched out lesions of the skull bone. These are the important classical findings in case of patient suffering from multiple myeloma. Now, how are we going to diagnose, or how are we going to investigate? Diagnosis, I told you, out of these clinical features, the 2 out of the 3 must be present. Bone pains, fever, lytic bone lesions, proteinuria, anemia, infections, hypercalcemia, renal failure. Out of this, the most common presentation from the patient will be bony pain. It's about accounting for 70% of the cases. And the patient will have, when you measure serum calcium levels using RC-NOSO3 method, which we have already discussed in our practical classes, this patient will have shoot up of serum calcium levels. What is the normal serum calcium level? Yes, tell me. It is 8.5 to 10.5 milligram per deciliter. And 10% of the patient will have renal failure and infections, and 15% will have fever. The most commonest presentation, number 1, bony pain, number 2, hypercalcemia, number 3, fever. So, to diagnose multiple myeloma, 2 of the 3 are required for the diagnosis. What are those 2 of the 3? Apart from the symptoms. Serum and urine for the presence of paraproteins. When we do serum and urine analysis, we are going to get paraprotein. We are going to detect it. How are we going to detect? We will discuss later. And the patient suffering from multiple myeloma is subjected for bone marrow biopsy, will show abnormal number and cytology of the plasma cells. And when we do serum electrophoresis, we get something called M band, which we have already discussed in our spotters. That is M band and electrophoresis in gamma region, shown to be monoclonal on immunofixation test. Then skeletal X-ray will show punched out appearance of the bone, that we have seen in the previous X-ray slide. When we do serum electrophoresis of this patient, you can see the spike. There is a sharp peak spike here, the yellow colored one, which is present occupying the gamma region. This is called as M band or multiple myeloma band. Once we find a peak or the prominent band in the gamma region, always keep in mind it could be due to multiple myeloma. This we call it as M spike. It can not only in gamma region, but it can be present between beta and gamma also. It can even occupy between beta and gamma. But 80% of the time it occupies the gamma region. Getting my point? So this is about the serum electrophoresis test for diagnosing multiple myeloma. Then there is something called urine test to detect paraprotein. Which are those paraprotein? They are nothing but Bence-Jones protein. These are the light chains which are excreted in a patient suffering from the multiple myeloma, which we detected by a test called heat test. And number 2, Bradshaw test. What is this heat test? Look at this picture here. When we collect the urine of this patient, okay, and subject it to 45 to 60 degrees centigrade, you can see the precipitation which is present here, sort of white appearance of the urine, the cloudy appearance of the urine. This is called as Bence-Jones protein. When we heat it to 60 degree, it's going to appear. Again, when we overheat it, when we raise the temperature above 80 degree, at 100 degree they are going to dissolve completely, becoming again transparent solution. There is no cloudiness in the sample. Again, when we cool it back to the 60 degrees centigrade, again they are going to appear. Again, when we cool it to the room temperature, they are going to disappear. Mainly they are going to be precipitated at a temperature of 45 to 60 degrees centigrade. It is a classical characteristic feature of Bence-Jones protein, above which they are going to dissolve and below which they are going to dissolve. They are going to get precipitated only between 45 to 60 degrees centigrade. This is a property that is exhibited by the Bence-Jones protein. Now, what is Bradshaw test? When we take equal volumes of the urine of the patient suffering from multiple myeloma, and when we take equal quantity of hydrochloric acid. When we layer an acid on that, we can see a white color ring because of the presence of the globulins. Getting my point? This is about the Bradshaw test. Now coming to the other investigations, the supporting evidences of for the diagnosis of multiple myeloma, you can measure serum calcium level, blood urea, because the patient may go for renal failure because of the excessive production of Benson's proteins, okay, which are going to obstruct the renal tubule, can damage the renal vasculature, can damage the glomerular basement membrane, and they can shoot up in the blood urea and serum creatinine levels, and the serum albumin level is going to be reduced, and a complete blood picture has to be taken, because the patient can have normocytic normochromic anemia. Patient suffering from multiple myeloma can present with the normocytic normochromic anemia. ESR is going to be raised, and beta 2 macroglobulin, that's microglobulin, is going to be raised, and serum paraprotein concentration going to be shooted up. So these are the supporting investigations that are done in case of a patient suffering from the multiple myeloma. Now there is something called heavy chain disease. The name itself is indicating it as heavy chain disease. Some portions of the heavy chains are deleted. What happens during the production of immunoglobulins? Some portions of the heavy chains may get deleted during their synthesis. In that case, what happens? They cannot join with the L chains, because some of the portions are deleted. It can be constant region or it can be variable region, but they are going to get deleted. Due to which the light chains are unable to identify, and they are unable to form a normal immunoglobulin. These defective heavy chains are going to be excreted in the urine. Hence, it is called as heavy chain disease. The gamma chain disease is associated with the patient can have severe hepatosplenomegaly, and because of accumulation of this proteins, and lymphadenopathy. The alpha chain disease is associated with abdominal lymphoma and malabsorption. So the different type of immunoglobulins are affecting different organs. And there's another important disease called Waldenstrom's macroglobulinemia. W looks, if you reverse it, it looks like M. So that, remember, this is a disorder due to malignant proliferation of IgM clones. W, when you read it in the reverse, it is M. So it is IgM clones are affected here. This condition is characterized by elevated IgM in the blood and with a monoclonal peak. Males are affected, again W, M, males are more commonly affected. Since IgM are macromolecular, I told you the molecular weight of IgM is very high, it's about 9 lakhs. They form aggregates or cryoprecipitate. So because of this accumulation of IgM variety, the viscosity of the blood is going to raise, and the patient will have recurrent bleeding. How are we going to diagnose this? When we observe, when we take a normal, drop of a serum of a normal person who is not suffering from Waldenstrom's macroglobulinemia, if we make it to fall into the test tube containing water, normal serum is going to spread equally, but hyperviscous serum will form a globular precipitate. It's going to form globular precipitate. That's how we are going to differentiate a serum from the normal serum from the Waldenstrom macroglobulinemia serum. It's going to form a globular precipitate. That's called a CR test. Then about 20% of the patients suffering from multiple myeloma are going to develop something called amyloidosis, which you are going to read in detail in pathology. These amyloid deposits are seen especially in the liver and kidney. These are the two organs which are commonly affected. And in case of myeloma, the amyloid fibrils will contain polymerized variable region of light chains and termed as AL. And how are we going to diagnose this amyloidosis? By using Congo red staining. That's about amyloidosis. There's some important technology called hybridoma technology for the production of monoclonal antibodies. So the Kohler and Milstein were the first persons who have described about this particular aspect, for which they were awarded Nobel Prize in 1984 for the development of this hybridoma technology. In genetics, we have already studied DNA hybrid, DNA, RNA hybrid. When two cells are fused, we call it as hybrid, that's it. So the similar phenomenon operates here as well. Hybridoma technology. It is nothing but this technology is related to formation of something called hybrid cell. Fusion of two different cells, that's it. By a specific antibody, which cells we are going to use it, that is B cell and myeloma cell. A person suffering from multiple myeloma, we are going to take the serum or the tissue which contains myeloma cells, which is selected for its ability to grow in the tissue culture and for an absence of antibody chain synthesis. This is called as hybridoma technology. Now let's look into the aspect of it. Myeloma cells are propagated in a mice ascites. Immunize the normal mice with a specific antigen. Immune spleen cells and myeloma cells fused with the help of polyethylene glycol and incubated in the HAT medium. HAT means hypoxanthine aminopterin thymidine medium. It contains nucleic acid, that is hypoxanthine, thymidine, and aminopterin is a folate antagonist. You will understand when I explain this diagram, you will understand. This is the normal spleen cell taken from the mouse. Normal spleen cell, it has got SGPRTase enzyme. SGPRTase, yes, what is the function of SGPRTase? It is helpful in the synthesis of purine, that is salvage pathway, right? This purine biosynthesis, in turn DNA synthesis. They are HAT resistant. These cells are made HAT resistant. Means this HAT media contains hypoxanthine, aminopterin, thymidine. This aminopterin, it is a folate antagonist. Normally it should inhibit the DNA synthesis because it is a folate antagonist. But these spleen cells, we are making them resistant. Even though aminopterin is there, still the cells will proliferate and cells are going to multiply. Ig secretion is positive, proliferation negative. Okay, so we are making it, normally they are proliferative, but we are making them not proliferative here. Okay, now myeloma cells, we have taken a myeloma cell from the animal suffering from the multiple myeloma. We have taken a myeloma cell which is grown in cell culture of the myeloma line. This myeloma cells we have created in such a way that they are SGPRTase negative. They do not contain SGPRTase enzyme. They are HAT sensitive. That means aminopterin is going to inhibit the DNA synthesis. IgG secretion negative, but they are having a tendency to proliferate. These are the myeloma cells. These are the spleen cells. They both are going to be grown in the medium called polyethylene glycol. Now there is a tendency that the normal cell can fuse with each other, and there may be a tendency that the myeloma cell can fuse each other here. But we do not want single myeloma cell, we do not want single spleen cell. We want only the fused cells like this, myeloma and the spleen cells which have been fused. This fused cells we are going to pick it up and fuse in the polyethylene glycol, select the hybrids and select the cells making desired antibody, then propagate them in the clones and grow in the mass culture. We are going to get enormous amount of antibodies, and here when we induce into the mouse again, so it's going to produce enormous amount of antibodies. Getting my point? So I told you normal cells are not proliferative. So when two normal cells will combine, automatically they are going to die. They do not have proliferative tendency, number one. The other thing is that myeloma cells are lacking SGPRTase enzyme. When two myeloma cells are going to join, again they are going to die because SGPRTase is negative. They are not able to synthesize DNA for the cell proliferation. In either case they are going to die, but when myeloma fuses with the spleen cell, they have got a tendency to grow because deficiency of each other are substituted by the other. Okay, because myeloma cells is SGPRTase negative, but a spleen cell is SGPRT positive. They are going to substitute each other, and when they are going to get fused, there will be enormous production of the antibodies. This is called as hybridoma technology. Now, what is the application? And diagnostic uses for the diagnosis of bacterial, viral, parasitic disease, blood grouping, standardization, and leukocytic identification to CD antigen. They are used against the HLA antigens for phenotypic screening purpose as well. And the therapeutic applications, they are used in the anti-tumor therapy because I already told you monoclonal antibodies which are employed in the treatment of cancer. Do you remember? And immunosuppression in case of graft rejection, organ transplantation that normally happens, and autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, systemic lupus erythematosus, autoimmune thyroid disease. So in that kind of diseases we can. Now there's a new concept in your syllabus for this year, that is vaccines. It can be coming for a short notes or short answer. Vaccines are nothing but it's a process of active immunization by which a mankind was able to survive by preventing several infections which had a high mortality rate in the olden times. In the past, because of this particular infections, many people have lost their life, and because of which in the 20th century the universal immunization program was employed, and it was successfully successfully was applied in every nation. It was implemented by the WHO, and still we are having lack of vaccine for corona, HIV and certain bacterial infections. Initial trials of smallpox and rabies vaccinations were developed, and they were practiced by Jenner and Pasteur in 18th 19th century, and it provides adaptive immunity to resist the attack of the specific infectious agent. But yes, the vaccine which is developed used for the infection should be safe. It should induce correct type of immunity, and it should be affordable to every citizen, every human being. The type of vaccines are live attenuated vaccines used in polio, MMR, yellow fever, tuberculosis, hepatitis A, killed intact organisms for polio, rabies, influenza, hepatitis A, pertussis, typhoid, cholera, Q fever. Subcellular fragments or capsular polysaccharides have been employed in the treatment of meningitis. And there's pentavalent vaccine that is available these days. Pentavalent have got 5 different immunization against 5 different infections. And toxin based, we are going to employ it in tetanus toxoid and cholera, diphtheria. RNA based for hepatitis B, rabies, influenza, streptococcal and pneumonia infections. What is the mechanism of action of this vaccines? There's an antigen presenting cell which is going to activate T and B cells, and the memory cells of T and B gets activated. They develop something called herd immunity, and in turn they prevent the outbreak of contagious disease. Definitely has got a therapeutic role in AIDS, tuberculosis and autoimmune disease as well. So this is about the mechanism of vaccines, and whenever the vaccines are developed, they undergo certain phases like preclinical stage and clinical stage, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 and phase 4 trials before they come into the market. The homework are interleukins, interferons, HLA antigens. What are HLA antigens? What are split genes? What is gene transposition with respect to immunoglobulins? We are going to study, and we are going to give break for 5 minutes, and we will assemble after 5 minutes and start a different new topic. So please do read about all these topics. Immunoglobulins can be asked for the main question. We are going to start exactly by 11:05. ब्रेक दिया हूँ है ना, तो थोड़ा सा बाद में चालू करना है, ठीक है? 5 मिनट तक। हाँ हाँ हाँ, इधर ही रखूँगी, कॉल कर दूँगी। Good morning. So we'll start the second session now, focusing on vitamins chapter. Yeah, vitamins already classification has been discussed, and humans, we cannot synthesize sufficient quantities of vitamins in our body. Hence, we do also require them in the diet. Deficiency of these vitamins, the cofactors and the enzymes is a common problem across the world. They are mainly divided as water soluble and hello, hello, hello. Yeah, tell me. So the water soluble vitamins are totally 9 in number, and the fat soluble are 4. So let us outline the important differences between them. Before that, water soluble vitamins are the precursors of several enzymes, the coenzymes which are required for the enhancing the activity of the enzymes of the intermediary metabolism. Can you tell me there is one fat soluble vitamin which could also function as coenzyme? So you are going to answer me this question. Yeah. Vitamins are classified as water and fat soluble. The non-B complex ascorbic acid, the B complex are into 3 different categories: energy releasing, which are thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, biotin and pantothenic acid. The hematopoietic vitamins are mainly folic acid and B12. The others are pyridoxine, pyridoxal, pyridoxamine. Altogether we call it as vitamin B6. The fat soluble vitamins are A, D, E, K that you already studied. Now coming to the important differences, there is no much about absorption aspect of the water soluble except for vitamin B12, which requires intrinsic factor for its absorption. Rest all vitamins are absorbed in a passive manner, whereas fat soluble vitamins are released, absorbed, transported with the help of fat and the fat of the diet. And the carrier proteins are present in water soluble vitamins, and it does not require in case of fat soluble. And water soluble are normally not stored except for vitamin B12, but most of the fat soluble vitamins are stored in the body. They are excreted in the urine, and fat soluble are not excreted in the urine. And when we look at the deficiency and over toxicity of these vitamins, deficiency of vitamin B complex is more common rather than the toxicity. Since they are water soluble, even excessive administration may not cause much problems to the patient. But yes, fat soluble vitamins are actively stored in the liver, so the excessive can cause hypervitaminosis. Is a major problem with that is the reason the dosing has to be monitored when you are giving vitamin K, vitamin A supplements in case of the patient, and especially vitamin D, which can cause excessive vitamin D can cause hypercalcemia, renal stones, renal calculi, which is going to cause severe renal colicky pain and landing up within the renal failure. And the water soluble vitamins are regularly needed in the diet, and whenever the patient has got a deficiency, you just supplement them with bacosuls or vitamin B complex, that would be doing their job in a proper manner. But fat soluble vitamins, the single large doses have to be given to them. Then coming to the first water soluble vitamin is thiamine. We call it as vitamin B1. The other name for thiamine is A-nurin. A-nurin. It is present in the aileron layer of the cereals. That is why unpolished rice, whole wheat flour, they are the richest sources of thiamine. Polishing of the rice is going to destroy your thiamine. That's the reason the people who are on regular diet with a polished rice are going to suffer from the thiamine deficiency. The coenzyme from the active form of the thiamine is, it is in the form of thiamine pyrophosphate. ATP donates its pyrophosphate group to the thiamine with the help of an enzyme called kinase. It makes thiamine into thiamine pyrophosphate, which is the active form of the enzyme. It's the active form of the vitamin thiamine. The RDA is 1 to 1.5 milligram per day. Especially whenever a person who is taking a lot of rice, that's carbohydrates, if he suffers from thiamine deficiency, he is going to land up in several problems, because the thiamine vitamin plays a key role in carbohydrate metabolism. Once we have taken the food, it is converted into glucose. Glucose has to undergo glycolysis, TCA cycle, right, with the help of insulin. Okay, whenever the insulin is released, it enhances the utilization of glucose via the carbohydrate metabolism. Which are those enzymes? The TPP is required in PDH reaction. What is this PDH stands for? Pyruvate dehydrogenase, which will convert pyruvate, which is an aerobic glycolysis end product, into acetyl-CoA, which takes place in mitochondria with the help of an enzyme called pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. It has got 3 enzymes and 5 coenzymes. The 3 enzymes are pyruvate dehydrogenase, dihydrolipoyl dehydrogenase, dihydrolipoyl transacetylase, and the coenzymes are TPP, yes, TPP, lipoic acid, coenzyme A, then FAD and NAD, right? These are the 5 coenzymes that is required by this particular enzyme. Thus it forms acetyl-CoA, which is going to enter the TCA cycle for further oxidation into carbon dioxide and the water with the production of ATP. The next enzyme is alpha-ketoglutaric acid dehydrogenase, again which is a multi-enzyme complex of the TCA cycle, and trans-ketolase enzyme, which is again a trans-ketolase, means it is helpful in the transfer of keto group from one amino acid to the another keto acid, producing new keto acid and amino acid, that is via the HMP pathway. And branched chain amino acid metabolism like valine, isoleucine and leucine. Let us look into the example. Pyruvate to acetyl-CoA with the help of pyruvate dehydrogenase, the removal of carbon dioxide, hence it is called oxidative decarboxylation. The alpha-ketoglutarate is converted to succinyl-CoA, again it's an example for oxidative decarboxylation. The enzyme is multi-enzyme complex alpha-ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. And look at the reaction which is operating in the HMP pathway, that is 5-ribose 5-phosphate combines with xylulose 5-phosphate, that together it is 10-phosphate. Ribose is a, yes, aldose sugar, and this is a keto sugar, forming the new keto sugar and new aldose sugar. That is, ribose combines with xylulose to form pseudoheptulose containing 7 carbon atom. It is a ribose, it is a keto sugar, and glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, which is a ribose sugar. So this is about the trans-ketolation reaction. Now coming to the deficiency manifestation of thiamine. Thiamine deficiency is more commonly associated with the people who are chronic alcoholics. Why? Whenever the chronic alcoholics consume a lot of alcohol, and they do, does not take nutrition following alcohol consumption. So there is number 1, nutrition deficiency, because they do not take food appropriately. Number 2, the alcohol itself will cause, inhibition of the absorption of the thiamine. It is going to interfere with the thiamine absorption, hence there is a thiamine deficiency in these patients. There is something called beriberi. The deficiency of thiamine leads to beriberi. It is divided into wet and dry beriberi. Wet beriberi affects the cardiovascular system. Mainly the patient will present with the, you can see there the pedal edema of the legs, and they do present with the congestive cardiac failure or heart failure. And the dry beriberi is going to affect the neurological system, mainly accounting for, sometimes paralysis. The patient is unable to move his limbs at all. So this can happen with the dry beriberi. Patient can have peripheral neuritis, because it is also required for the central nervous system functioning, neurological transmission by opening up the chloride channels in them. So this is the various functions of thiamine accounting for dry and wet beriberi. And there is something called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. This Wernicke encephalopathy, it is a triad of 3 things, that is COA. C stands for confusion, O stands for ophthalmaloplasia, and A stands for ataxia. Patient presenting with thiamine deficiency can develop this particular syndrome, wherein the patient lands up with a lot of confusion. Ataxia means irregular movement. There is a problem with the balancing of the body, incorporation of the muscle movements, and the patient has got a tendency to fall. And the patient with Wernicke's encephalopathy will have ophthalmaloplasia, where there is a paralysis of extraocular muscle. They are supplied by which cranial nerves? Yes, oculomotor, that is 3rd, then trochlear nerve, that is 4th, and abducent nerve, which is 6th cranial nerve. So when these the muscles which supplied by these particular nerves are damaged, there is extraocular paralysis, resulting in rapid eye movements, upward eye movements, up down, side to side in a circular manner. It's called as nystagmus. So these are some of the characteristic features of Wernicke's encephalopathy. You can see the failure of adduction of this. They are unable to close the eye, and leading to eye, continuous rapid movements of the eye. And patients with Korsakoff syndrome, they'll end up with acute psychosis. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to diagnose this acute psychosis secondary to thiamine deficiency. Patient even can have depression in this kind of syndrome, and patient can have polyneuritis affecting the, causing the inflammation of the neurons, peripheral nervous system, leading to polyneuritis. And how are we going to diagnose the thiamine deficiency apart from the physical signs and symptoms? Yes, we can measure something called transketolase activity in the RBC. This particular enzyme, which is related to the HMP pathway, and this enzyme is going to be decreased. The activity of this particular enzyme is going to be hampered in RBCs, accounting for diagnosis of thiamine deficiency. So how are we going to treat, manage the patient? We are going to supplement thiamine in these patients, and it's very much treatable. The second enzyme is riboflavin. It is called as vitamin B2. It's a Warburg enzyme. Warburg was the scientist who discovered this enzyme. First he called it as yellow enzyme. And the coenzyme forms of riboflavin are FMN and FAD. The RDA is 1.5 milligram per day. Similar to that of thiamine pyrophosphate, the riboflavin have got a vital role in the amino acid metabolism, that is L-amino acid oxidase, which is involved in the oxidation of amino acid, do require FMN, which is converted to FMNH2, and the oxidation of D amino acids are going to require FAD as a coenzyme. And you very well know about the electron transport chain. The FADH2 going to enter the electron transport chain through the second complex via succinate dehydrogenase reaction. Just try to correlate all these aspects. So this is one of the component of electron transport chain as well. The PDH complex, again a multi-enzyme complex. I already discussed the 5 coenzymes which are required. One of them is FAD. And the TCA cycle, that is alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase reaction, against a multi-enzyme complex requiring so many coenzymes for it. And that's about the alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase, similar to TPP functions. And purine degradation, where exactly that this enzyme acting as a coenzyme, this particular vitamin acting as a coenzyme. The conversion of hypoxanthine to xanthine, xanthine to uric acid do require an enzyme called xanthine oxidase, which is dependent on FAD. FAD is converted to FADH2. Getting my point? So this is about the purine degradation. It's involved in certain vitamin synthesis as well. Now, what are the deficiency manifestations of riboflavin? It causes something called glossitis, that is inflammation of the tongue. We call it as glossitis, and you can see magenta red color tongue because of the inflammation, and chiliosis, that means fissures in the lip, angular stomatitis, the corners of the mouth, there is inflammation, and you can see the circumcorneal vascularization. And the earliest sign of this riboflavin deficiency is that circumcorneal, the bulbar conjunctival vessels are undergoing proliferation. You can see the prominence of the blood vessels over here, the bulbar conjunctiva. And how are we going to diagnose the, and you can see certain ridges, abnormal ridges that are present on the nails. And how are we going to diagnose this? So we are going to measure something called measurement of activation of RBC glutathione activity. And by measuring this, we are going to diagnose riboflavin deficiency, which is going to require riboflavin as a coenzyme. And as such, there is no reported toxicity with respect to riboflavin. Next, coming to the niacin, it is strictly not a vitamin, but yeah, it is synthesized from tryptophan. The niacin vitamin is synthesized from the tryptophan. About 60 milligrams of tryptophan is required for synthesis of 1 milligram of niacin. Niacin coenzymes are NAD and NADP. The RDA is little more compared to the thiamine and riboflavin. It's about 20 milligram per day. Basically, niacin has got a vital role in our body, having got a lot of functions, many dehydrogenases pertaining to carb metabolism, fat metabolism, lipid metabolism, and protein metabolism are mainly dependent on this particular coenzyme. Especially playing an important role in oxidation reduction reactions pertaining to these metabolisms, and it plays a significant role in hemoglobin metabolism as well. And there are some reactions which are going to generate NADPH. Do you remember HMP pathway, which is going to generate NADPH, that is glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase reaction, 6-phosphogluconolactone dehydrogenase reaction. They are going to produce, or they are going to convert NADP into NADPH. NADPH is required for, let us recollect, tell me the functions of NADPH. Yes, to maintain the RBC integrity. It prevents the RBC cell from the hemolysis. It is a strong antioxidant system, and it's going to be useful in the biosynthesis of cholesterol, yes, hormone synthesis, then bile acid synthesis. So please do remember cytochrome P450, which is dependent upon NADPH. So please do recollect and remember about this particular aspect. And coming to the deficiency manifestations of niacin, the deficiency of niacin causes something called pellagra, the Italian word which means dry skin. This pellagra, the 4 Ds of pellagra: dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, and death. You can see the red erythematous reddish rashes because of the sun exposure on these areas will in fact precipitate the rashes more and more. The photosensitivity is more with this kind of dermatitis, and you can see the dermatitis, inflammation of the skin across the neck. It is in the form of Castle's necklace, and you can see some certain abnormal indentations or ridges that are present over the nails. A patient will have diarrhea, and the patient will have dementia. There's a loss of memory and forgetfulness, and patient can land up with the, ultimately, if it is not treated at the earliest, the patient can land up with the death. Now coming to the deficiency, what are the causes, different causes of niacin deficiency that is accounting for? The maize, which is a staple food, it is actually niacin is present in the maize, but it is in the bound form. So that's the reason a patient who is the people whose main diet is maize will going to suffer from the niacin deficiency. Sorghum contains high levels of leucine. Leucine is going to inhibit tryptophan metabolism. The tryptophan ultimately required for niacin synthesis is going to be hampered. Deficiency pyridoxine. Pyridoxine is enzyme, which is the pyridoxine is a vitamin. The coenzyme form of pyridoxine is PLP. The kynureninase enzyme, which is involved in the synthesis of niacin from the tryptophan. When you read tryptophan metabolism, definitely you're going to learn about the niacin synthesis from the tryptophan. There is an enzyme called kynureninase. It is an enzyme which is dependent on PLP as a coenzyme. This pyridoxine deficiency can account for niacin deficiency because of the kynureninase enzyme, lack of kynureninase enzyme in the pathway during the synthesis of niacin from the tryptophan. There is something called Hartnup disease. In this disease, what happens? There is a defect in the transportation and reabsorption of the tryptophan, thus accounting for tryptophan deficiency. There is something called carcinoid syndrome. It is a carcinoid syndrome is a type of tumor that develops in the stomach, duodenum, jejunum, or the small intestine, appendica, and the rectal or colonic tissues, which is going to produce excessive serotonin and accounting for secondary deficiency of the tryptophan, because all the tryptophan that was present, that was available in the body, was diverted for the serotonin synthesis, and there is a partial or secondary deficiency of tryptophan which is also required for the niacin synthesis. This is hampered, so resulting in niacin deficiency. And therapeutically, this niacin has got a challenging role in the decreasing the cholesterol and the lipoprotein A levels, which are both are very harmful to the body because they are going to precipitate atherosclerosis, in fact leading to coronary artery disease, cardiovascular diseases. And this niacin is going to reduce this bad cholesterol, that's lipoprotein A. And sometimes giving the patient with very high doses of niacin could also be a dangerous because it can precipitate the release of histamine. So histamine, again, it's a mediator of allergic reactions, which could be a dangerous aspect in these kind of patients. Now coming to the next vitamin, that is pyridoxine. Pyridoxine has got 3 different forms: pyridoxine, pyridoxal, that is aldehyde, alcohol form, and pyridoxamine. The coenzyme form of pyridoxine is pyridoxal phosphate, PLP. The RDA is 1 to 2 milligram per day, and it's got a central role in amino acid metabolism. Amino acid metabolism could never be complete without the help of pyridoxine. Thus, the patient or the person who eats a lot of protein diet should also take pyridoxine. Getting my point? P for protein, P for pyridoxine. Similarly, a patient or the person who is going to eat a lot of carbohydrate diet requires which vitamin? Thiamine. Getting my point? Protein requiring vitamin is pyridoxine. Carbohydrate requiring vitamin is thiamine. Please do remember about it. Pyridoxine plays an important role in transamination, decarboxylation, transsulfuration, tryptophan metabolism, heme biosynthesis, glycogenolysis. Transamination. Can you give an example of transamination? It is AST, ALT, that is aspartate transaminase and alanine transaminase. Alanine combines with alpha ketoglutarate. Do you remember? In presence of alanine transaminase to form pyruvate and glutamate. So this ALT, AST are raised in liver diseases, and ALT specifically raised in hepatic jaundice. So you remember all that. Then decarboxylation. All the decarboxylase enzymes in our body do require PLP as a coenzyme. Deficiency of PLP can lead to many severe health consequences, because ultimately glutamic acid is converted to GABA. What is GABA? It is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. If there is a less production of GABA in the body, especially in the newborn child, it's going to suffer from severe attack of convulsions, because inhibitory neurotransmitters are defective. That is, GABA is defective in this patient. The patient can land up with the excitatory neurons in excess and causing something called convulsions. Histidine is converted to histamine. That is also an example for decarboxylation reaction. Dopa to dopamine, right? So these are some of the examples for decarboxylation reaction. And transsulfuration reaction play an important role in the cysteine metabolism, wherein homocysteine is converted to methionine. The formation of methionine from the homocysteine is an example for transsulfuration as well. And tryptophan metabolism plays a very important role, that is pyridoxine, and conversion of tryptophan to niacin, again kynureninase, which is again dependent on PLP as a coenzyme. And heme biosynthesis, it plays a delta amino levulinic acid formation step, requires PLP as a coenzyme. And the key enzyme of glycogenolysis, that is glycogen phosphorylase, which is again dependent on PLP as its coenzyme. You remember the key enzyme of glycogenolysis is glycogen phosphorylase. Which is the key enzyme of glycogen synthesis? It is glycogen synthase. Synthase is not dependent on PLP, but glycogen phosphorylase is dependent on PLP as a coenzyme. Now this portion is not required for you guys, but just for the sake of completion, let us look into that. It has got something to do with the hormones, especially with the estrogen, the pyridoxine. And there's a literature saying that the pyridoxine, the vitamin B6 deficiency, there's an increased sensitivity to steroid hormone action, and the estrogen concentration is going to be raised, and the patient is going to land up with the causation or the development of breast cancer. That's one of the aspect of the pyridoxine. Coming to the PLP requiring enzyme in the tryptophan metabolism, you can see this particular step, that is 3-hydroxykynurenine is converted to 3-hydroxyantranilic acid with the help of an enzyme called kynureninase, which is going to require PLP as a coenzyme. And look at the decarboxylation example, estrogen to histamine, tyrosine to tyramine. What is the importance of this tyramine? Can anyone tell me? Tyramine, what is the importance? It is a causative factor for migraine. Patient suffering from migraine definitely have to avoid food containing excessive aromatic amino acids, especially tyramine component of it's a decarboxylated product of tyrosine is implicated in the causation of migraine. And tryptophan to tryptamine, glutamic acid to GABA, lysine to cadaverine, and all. It is called cadaverine because it was isolated from the cadavers. That's the reason it's called cadaverine. And coming to this is about the transsulfuration. Coming to the transsulfuration reaction, homocysteine combines with the serine in presence of PLP, which is acting as a coenzyme, which is required by cystathionin beta synthase. The enzyme name is cystathionin beta synthase. This cystathionin, again with the help of cystathioninase, gets converted to homoserine and cysteine. So please do remember this particular step, and it is again an important pathway for the cysteine metabolism as well. The cystathionin beta synthase is dependent on PLP. So once the enzyme is defective because of the absence of or the deficiency of pyridoxal phosphate or vitamin B6 deficiency, what happens to homocysteine is going to get accumulated in the blood. Once homocysteine gets accumulated in the blood, it can, act as a precursor for many pathways. It can cause, yes, the patient can have myocardial infarction. The person who is detected with the elevated levels of homocysteine in the next 1 year definitely is going to have an attack, because it is going to cause thrombosis. Okay, so it's going to hamper the platelet activity to a certain extent, and there's something called fibrinogen degradation product. It's going to be hampered and it's going to precipitate the myocardial infarction. The molecular mechanisms of homocysteine and causation of cardiovascular, please do read about it. It's a very interesting topic. And coming to the deficiency, once I already said you PLP deficiency, the homocysteine is going to shoot up. So there is homocysteinemia resulting in myocardial infarction. The patient can have neurological symptoms. Dermatological, yes, why? Why dermatological? Again, patient can have pellagra. Why? Because pyridoxine deficiency. PLP is required by kynureninase enzyme in the pathway of synthesis of niacin from the tryptophan. Patient will have niacin deficiency, pellagra like again symptoms. And hematological, because it is required in the heme biosynthesis, patient can have microcytic. You can see the size of the RBCs are reduced. So microcytic hypochromic anemia. And so effect of certain drugs like isoniazid and cyclosporine and alcohol, which are going to involve in they are going to act as a pyridoxine antagonist. They are going to inhibit pyridoxine kinase enzyme as well. So thus accounting for the deficiency of pyridoxine. And how are we going to detect the deficiency of pyridoxine? You can see here the patient with the neurological is unable to walk, and will have tonic phase and clonic phase abnormal movements, resulting in neuritis. Actually, patient has neuritis as well. And how are we going to detect the deficiency? By assaying the vitamin B6 in the RBC. That is, the RBC transaminases are measured. And when we supplement pyridoxine with a very high dose, more than 100 milligram, it can lead to sensory neuropathy. And the other benefits of pyridoxine is that patient who is having oxaluria, homocystinuria, xanthine aciduria, xanthurinic aciduria, patient with cardiovascular risk can be, most of the patient these days, most of the metropolitan cities and all, people who are belonging to educated families, they themselves are supplementing vitamin B complex without any doctor's prescription. There's a trend that is going on to prevent future heart attack risk, all that. And taking vitamin B complex, again, it is not a harmful thing to our body, because they are water soluble. Ultimately, they get excreted in the urine. The toxicity is actually very rare. And coming to the next vitamin, that is pantothenic acid. Pantos means present everywhere, and bacterial flora is going to synthesize this particular vitamin. It contains beta alanine in it. The coenzyme form is CoA, and the functions are that it plays an important role in all CoA containing elements. All CoA containing compounds are derived from the pantothenic acid, playing an important role in acetylation, TCA cycle, cholesterol biosynthesis, and fatty acid oxidation. The only problem with the pantothenic acid deficiency is that the patient can land up with burning feet syndrome, called as Gopalan's burning feet syndrome, also known as nutritional melalgia or peripheral nerve damage. Okay, the patient will have very warm foot, and can be treated by supplementing the pantothenic acid. There's something called pantothenase kinase associated neurodegeneration, so you need not know much about this. And coming to the vitamin called biotin, it is called as vitamin H. It is also called as anti-egg white injury factor. The coenzyme form is biositine, carboxy biositine. The RDA it is in micrograms. Remember, the RDA of vitamin biotin is 30 to 40 microgram per day. Again, biotin plays an important role in the carboxylation reaction, wherein carbon dioxide is required. Certain enzymes like pyruvate carboxylate. Tell me, what is the function of pyruvate carboxylase? Do you remember? Gluconeogenesis? Yes, pyruvate is converted to oxaloacetate with the help of pyruvate carboxylase, which is a key enzyme, right? And propenyl-CoA carboxylase in the metabolism of hard chain fatty acids, and acetyl-CoA carboxylase and methyl-crotonyl carboxylase. These are all biotin dependent carboxylation reaction. The biotin independent are addition of carbon dioxide to the purine ring. I hope you remember, with the help of CPS1 and CPS2, air carboxylase that is happening in the purine biosynthesis. Malic enzyme, gamma carboxylation of glutamic acid residues for vitamin K. I hope you remember about that. And there's something called biotin antagonist called avidin, which is present in the egg, which is a biotin, affinity of avidin to biotin is very stronger than any other antigen antibody reaction. Hence could be used for the DNA labeling ELISA test and streptavidin. So deficiency manifestations of biotin include that the patient can have mental changes and nail changes. You can see split nails here. The nail is split. Alopecia, that means hair loss, and how do we diagnose this? By measuring the urinary biotin levels going to be decreased, and elevated excretion of valeric acid, and decreased activity of biotin dependent enzymes in the lymphocytes can be one of the diagnostic feature of biotin deficiency. And how we're going to manage this case? By injecting biotin at a dose of 100 to 300 milligrams are going to give a rapid cure in this biotin deficient patients. Then coming to the next vitamin, that is folic acid. It is derived from the Latin word folium. It is present in mainly green leaves, okay. And the important question about folic acid is that the absorption takes place in the jejunum. The coenzyme form of folic acid is tetrahydrofolic acid. The RDA is 200 micrograms per day. The folic acid has got an important vital role in the 1-carbon metabolism. When you read amino acid metabolism, already you would be very well thorough about the 1-carbon metabolism. The 1-carbon units are methyl, methynyl, and formyl groups. Plays an important role in transmethylation, especially for the synthesis of choline, epinephrine, creatine, histidine metabolism, purine biosynthesis. Do you remember purine biosynthesis? And for one particular, I think 2 steps we have added the THFA, which is a source of purine ring. You remember carbon 2, carbon 8? Yes. So those are the steps which require folic acid participation. And please look at this 1-carbon metabolism. There are different types of THFA, that is formyl, form-amino, methinyl, and hydroxymethyl and methylene. Format and tryptophan are going to donate formyl THFA. It's going to be utilized for the formation of C2, carbon 2 of the purine ring, and formyl methinyl tRNA, which is required for for transcription and translation, mainly for yes. Then coming to the histidine, it generates form-amino group, and it is going to get converted to methynyl THFA, going to be utilized for carbon 8 of the purine biosynthesis. Choline donates its hydroxy group, serine methyl group, glycine THFA to methylene THFA, which is going to be again utilized for the synthesis of glycine, serine, and deoxy UMP to deoxy TMP. And ultimately they all generate an end product called methyl THFA. This methyl THFA, upon removal of THFA, gets converted to methionine, which plays an important role in transmethylation, creatine synthesis, and that is in the form of SAM, that is S-adenosyl methionine, serine, creatine. And please be thorough about, please do read about amino acid metabolism, otherwise it's very difficult to understand this particular topic. These are the antagonists. We have already discussed about this particular aspect in the genetics. Folic acid deficiency can hamper the DNA synthesis, can cause macrocytic anemia, then homocystinemia, birth defects. You can see there's anancapali, there is no head, and spina bifida, examphalocele, and patient can develop cancer, colorectal cancers, and acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and patient can even most of the time the patient suffering from depression, if you can give folic acid supplementation, definitely it's maybe one of the leading cause of depression. And this preconceptional before the planning of pregnancy itself, the folic acid consumption is advised these days. So in order to prevent the neural, suppose a pregnant lady is planning for a pregnancy, the woman is planning for a pregnancy in the coming 2-3 months, she can start supplementing folic acid 1 month prior to her plan of pregnancy itself. That's called preconceptional supplementation of folic acid. So one of the very important aspect about folic acid in order to prevent the neural tube defects. How are we going to, so can you please look at the various pathways, because until unless you know about this, you can't understand the deficiency assessment. Histidine is converted to urocanate, that is histidine metabolism dealing with urocanate to imidazoline propionate, in turn into Figlu. Figlu is converted to glutamate. During this particular step, it requires tetrahydrofolate, is converted to form-amino tetrahydrofolate. Getting my point? It's bit exhausting, little bit difficult to understand, but if you are thorough with the amino acid metabolism, it's very easy to recollect and remember about this particular aspect. The Figlu to glutamate conversion requires folic acid. Suppose there is folic acid deficiency, what will happen? Figlu is not converted to glutamate. that we call it as Figlu excretion test, which can assess it in the urine. Next, look at this particular image. ICAR is converted to FICAR. This is one of the important ninth step in case of purine biosynthesis. Amino imidazole carboxamide ribonucleotide is converted to formyl amino imidazole carboxamide ribonucleotide. It requires something called N10 formyl THFA. It is a folic acid derivative. If folic acid is not there, this particular reaction does not happen. Then ICAR gets accumulated, going to be excreted in the urine, which you are going to test it. Getting my point? Another important aspect is the serum homocysteine. Again, look at this particular image. During the metabolism of methionine, SAM is converted to SAH, that is S-adenosyl homocysteine. SAH, that is SAH, is converted to homocysteine. I told you methionine is synthesized from the homocysteine. Do require some enzyme called methionine synthase, again, which is dependent on vitamin B12, as well as it requires coenzyme as methyl THFA. Getting my point? For the methionine synthesis from the homocysteine, it requires methyl THFA as a coenzyme, which is converted to THFA. This particular step is going to be inhibited if there is no folic acid in the body. Then what is going to happen? Homocysteine going to get shooted up in the blood. It's going to be elevated. So this is also, so homocysteinemia you are seeing in pyridoxine deficiency as well as in the folic acid deficiency. Then when you look at the peripheral smear, the RBC look bigger in size, called as macrocytic anemia. The serum folate and RBC folate can be measured. And this is the normal bone marrow, and you can see megaloblastic bone marrow with the increased size of the erythroblast. Now, the last but one vitamin, that is vitamin B12. It is called as extrinsic factor of Castle. It contains cobalt atom, and 99% of the vitamin B12 has got active absorption. The difference between the folic acid and vitamin B12 is that absorption of B12 happens in the ileum, whereas the folic acid absorption takes place in the jejunum. So please do remember the coenzymes of B12 are methylcobalamin and adenosyl cobalamin, and a lot of stuff is involved about the absorption of vitamin B12. You please read about that, but do remember that it requires something called intrinsic factor for its absorption, which is secreted by the parietal cells of the stomach. This intrinsic factor is going to help in the absorption of vitamin B12, that is in the ileum. Getting my point? The RDA is 1 to 2 micrograms per day. The two coenzyme forms are methylcobalamin and adenosyl ADO-B12 or adenosyl cobalamin. So this is about the absorption part, and the main functions of this vitamin B12. It is I showed you in the this step. The homocysteine to methionine, that methionine formation do require vitamin B12 participation from the homocysteine. So it helps in the number one methionine synthesis. Number two, it requires it is required during the formation of succinyl-CoA. You can see here the fatty acids undergo oxidation, that is odd number of carbon atoms. When they undergo odd chain fatty acid, when they undergo oxidation, they do produce something called methyl malonyl-CoA, which we have already discussed in the lipid metabolism. Please do revise it. MMA is get converted to succinyl-CoA with the help of an enzyme called methyl malonyl-CoA mutase, which do require vitamin B12 as a coenzyme. That is deoxyadenosyl cobalamine form of the coenzyme is required for this particular step. When this particular vitamin B12 is deficient, the methyl malonyl-CoA gets excreted and it's get accumulated. Getting my point? So that is called MMA aciduria. Then during conversion of homocysteine to methionine, we have already seen that slide. That is methylcobalamin form is required. There's some other enzyme which do require vitamin B12 is leucine amino mutase. So these two are the important reactions wherein vitamin B12 act as a coenzyme. Now strict vegetarians, vegans are the sufferers of vitamin B12 deficiency, and it is the only water soluble vitamin which is going to be stored in the liver. And any malabsorption syndromes will cause inhibition of vitamin B12 absorption, leading accounting for vitamin B12 deficiency. And certain GI problems can cause vitamin B12 deficiency. Fish tapeworm, the people who consume fish tapeworm can also can lead to the deficiency of vitamin B12. And you can see the RBC sizes are increased here, presented with macrocytic anemia. And the deficiency can lead to the folate trap, because vitamin B12 Look at this particular reaction, homocysteine to methionine, it requires vitamin B12, and methyl THFA is getting converted to THFA. Suppose there is a vitamin B12 deficiency, the methyl THFA gets trapped. There is no more conversion into free THFA. Then leads to what is called as folate trap. It's called as folate trap hypothesis, and leading to megaloblastic anemia, again homocystinemia, accumulation of homocysteine. Therefore, homocystinemia can be treated with supplementing the patient with pyridoxine, folic acid and vitamin B12. So these are the three important vitamins having a vital role in the treatment of a patient suffering from homocystinemia. Because of the vitamin B12 deficiency, methyl malanoic acid cannot be converted into succinyl-CoA, leading to the methyl malanoic aciduria. And there's something called subacute combined degeneration of the spinal cord is very commonly seen with the patient with vitamin B12 deficiency, leading to demyelination. Okay, and how are we going to assess the vitamin B12 deficiency? By measuring the serum cobalamin, that is vitamin B12 levels, and methyl malanoic acid levels, and serum homocysteine. Schilling test these days it is not performed, please do read about it. Measuring the urine homocysteine and MMA levels, and bone marrow biopsy and bone marrow examination, peripheral smear examination. Therapeutically these days the vitamin B12 treatment is doing wonders in managing the patient with age-related macular degeneration, neuralgia, then hyperhomocystinemia, cyanide poisoning as well. FDA has approved in a treatment of cyanide poisoning as well. So now let us recollect what are the causes of nutritional anemia. Microcytic due to deficiency of iron, copper and pyridoxine. Normocytic due to protein energy malnutrition. Macrocytic anemia we usually come across with the deficiency of vitamin B12 and folate. Now coming to the last water soluble vitamin, which is not a part of B complex, is vitamin C. It is called anti-scopotic factors. Animals can synthesize them because of presence of gluconolactone oxidase enzyme, which is a part of uronic acid pathway. But human beings do lack an enzyme called gluconolactone oxidase, very important next NEXT question as well. So the gluconolactone oxidase is an enzyme which is absent in the human beings, hence we cannot synthesize vitamin C. Again, the requirement of vitamin C is very much more high compared to any other vitamin. Look at the RDA, it is about 75 milligram per day. The main function of vitamin C, we all know that it's a strong antioxidant, helps in the collagen synthesis during the hydroxylation of proline, hydroxylation of lysine. The hydroxylation reactions are mainly vitamin C dependent, and tryptophan hydroxylation, tyrosine hydroxylation. Again, these two are hydroxylations dependent on vitamin C. Helps in the absorption of iron. That's the reason. Did anyone take iron supplements for anemia treatment? You would have, please do read about those, Moro for XT tablet, what is the composition of it, what does it contain? It is in the form of ferrous ascorbate. It is a ferrous salt, iron salt clubbed with the ascorbate, because vitamin C helps in the absorption of iron. That's the reason the salts are given in the form of ferrous ascorbate. If you do not know, please go and see this iron tablets, Moro for XT, sort of, trade brand names. You can just look into it. That's the logic behind iron supplementation along with the vitamin C. And it is helpful in the bile acid synthesis, because again the hydroxylation reactions are dependent on vitamin C. And then it is helpful in the adrenal steroid hormone synthesis. Again, they are all hydroxylation reactions. And coming to the, you can see the deficiency manifestations like scurvy, bleeding of gums, swelling and inflammation. And Burlow syndrome, if it is affected, the infant will have abnormal gait, and as soon as you treat it with vitamin C, the changes become really reversible. Here you can see it was a picture that was taken from the Handbook of Nutrition and Ophthalmology, vitamin C and eye health. Spontaneous, you can see the exophthalmos, forward protrusion of the eyeball in this baby. Okay, it's an actually infant with scurvy. After treatment, you can see automatically there's a correction of this exophthalmos. Okay. So this is how the wonders done by the vitamin C in the treatment. As you can see, the bleeding of this comes and all this changes. And sometimes vitamin C toxicity could be very, very dangerous, because it can precipitate the formation of stone again, leading to renal calculi and causing renal damage. Okay. So this is about this is a overall a table about thiamine. The deficiency manifestations are very Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, polyneuritis, decreased RPC transketolase activity is the diagnostic feature of thiamine deficiency. Riboflavin causes deficiency causes glossitis, magenta color, tongue chiliosis, angular stomatitis. Niacin causes pellagra. Then pyridoxine deficiency causes dermatological and hematological manifestation. Pantothenic acid deficiency result in Gopal's food syndrome, biotin, alopecia, and hallucination sort of brain symptoms, and avidin in the raw egg is going to inhibit it. And folic acid and vitamin B12, they are mainly related with the macrocytic anemia and vitamin B12 demyelination as well. But the neural tube defects are not seen with vitamin B12, but they are quite common with the folic acid. That's the reason preconceptional folic acid is advised these days. Now let me read out the case. A 73-year-old woman comes to the physician because of 2-month history of diffuse weakness, tingling of her arms, legs. Neurological examination shows there is a weakness of extensor, flexor muscles of the lower extremities, knee and ankle, deep tendon reflex exaggerated, and sensation to vibration position is decreased in all extremities, but the decrease is more prominent in the lower extremities than the upper extremities. The patient is most likely to have all neurological symptoms. They can be having deficiency of cyanocobalamin, that is vitamin B12. What is a person with pernicious anemia lacking that makes it difficult to absorb vitamin B12? I told you intrinsic factor which is required for vitamin B12 absorption. Name the vitamin which is essential for the brain growth. B6, B9, B12 and all of them. So all of them are required definitely. So what is the term is used to describe type of anemia in which red cells are larger, immature, reduce of blood? This is macrocytic anemia, which is not needed in the TCR cycle. Yes, can anyone tell me? It is pyridoxine. Yes, because thiamine, riboflavin, niacin are all the coenzyme forms for the PDH complex alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase in the form of FAD and AD and all in TPP. Vitamin causing mental disorder. Yes, it can be niacin or thiamine. Both will cause mental disorder. But here the better option will be thiamine. Site of absorption of vitamin B12, I already said you it is ileum. Okay, so vitamin B12 causes all except neural tube defect, peripheral neuropathy, megaloblastic anemia, demyelination. I told you NTD, neural tube defect, is more with the folic acid, not with B12. Isoniazid toxicity can be prevented by use of vitamin B6. Yes. Cobalt is present in vitamin B12. Pro-oxidant action of vitamin C is potentiated by, yes, mineral metabolism already covered. It is with the help of selenium. And TPP can act as a coenzyme for both oxidative decarboxylation as well transketolation. Which vitamin is required for the absorption of iron? Ascorbic acid. Vitamin required for carbon dioxide fixation, that's carboxylation, biotin. Name the vitamin that protects us from pellagra, that is niacin, B3. Vitamin C is present in tomato, papaya, guava. This is Indian gooseberry. The amlas are the richest sources of vitamin C. And liver damage is caused due to overdose of which vitamin? That is B3, that's niacin. Okay. And circumcorneal vascularization, already I showed you the diagram, it's riboflavin. Okay. And biotin is a cofactor for carboxylation, and pantothenic acid containing enzyme plays an important, I told, noacetyl group addition, so acetylation. So these are some of the important questions. And so we have covered vitamins. Fat soluble vitamins was already covered, and today we have ended with the vitamin B complex. Please do read about pyridoxine in detail because it plays an important role in amino acid metabolism. Please do concentrate more on folic acid and vitamin B12, which can be asked for the long essay questions. And what are the functions of thiamine? Sometimes short notes can be asked about beriberi, Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. All this and sometimes macrocytic anemia causing vitamins that are responsible. The question can be like this: describe the functions and efficiency manifestations of the vitamins which are causing macrocytic anemia. In that case, you have to write both folic acid as well as B12. And if it is normocytic microcytic anemia, then definitely focus on pyridoxine. Okay. So this is about the vitamin metabolism. So thank you.